Well, joining me in our studio at Design Intelligence is Robert Ivy. We're so excited that he is here. He is a legend in this industry. We are excited again to be with you here and honored that you took the time to join us here.
Dave, a pleasure and appreciate that, but feeling less honored than comfortable and having a great chat with an audience and with friends of architecture and design.
Thank you. Well, our theme is called Forgotten Relevance. And the question that's on the table is, in our pursuit for the shiny new, the things in the future that we are always pursuing, what have we perhaps forgotten? What is it that we have left behind that we should have brought forward? It seems we're inclined towards what I call the baby in bathwater syndrome. If we move on and we just throw everything out goes out as we move to the new, right? And it has been an observation that at Design Intelligence we've watched over the last several years of just a question about this dynamic that I'm talking about. One of the things that I'm hoping that we'll spend some time with is in your the work that you've done in writing, in the academy, in certainly the American Institute of Architects, your very large global network. You have become acquainted with the history of architecture in an intimate way. And I'm most interested to have walked down that journey with you about what have been these significant milestone events in our history that have altered the trajectory and the practice of architecture over time. And we are now on the precipice of some serious other major alterations, or at least the either opportunity or threat thereof, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think just as a general observation, we've observed, as we have in much of contemporary civilization, the specialization of knowledge, the bifurcation, the evolution of ever-increasing trees and branches and tendrils of the way that we approach human knowledge. And at one point, and I dare say there was never an idealized past, an ideal past, but there was a greater unity of understanding when things were simpler. So the very name architect, as we know from every college graduation, has to do with someone who was involved in building. And it involved knowledge of what was being made, but how it was being made. And I think just as a gross simplification, that may be the real split that you're probably aiming at in this understanding. As projects and as buildings and as cities became more complex since the antiquity, let's say, depending on which division of pre-contemporary thought and culture that we're discussing, we saw knowledge codified, and we saw writing about architecture. We saw it in classical Rome with Vitruvius, but then later in the Renaissance, and ultimately, we see the specialization where architecture is included among the arts in France, for instance, and ultimately achieves its own school, its own special place to understand the intricacies and the nuances of something that is both an art and something else. And that happened in France at what became the École des Beaux-Arts, ultimately finding its full fruition in the 19th century. And since that time, we've sent American architects or would-be architects to France to learn how to make this new discipline, if you will. And in this country, we saw that become codified in what became a profession. That profession really emerged in the mid to late 19th century. So it's really a relatively new thing to understand and define what is an architect. Now, if you look back historically, that really included a simpler building, perhaps. And today there's greater complexity of projects and cities and places and society. I think among the great changes was actually the arrival of Walter Gropius in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the 1937 when he arrived, and really sort of the advent of modernity into architectural education. That was a major shift because it began to look at not only what we're making in a different way, but also ultimately how it might be made again. And in our own time, we've seen the change from handwork to, which I employed when I was a young architect coming along, as many of us who are still around, on drafting boards with pen and ink and pencil and paper. What is that? To today, and the advent of computer-aided design. That really, I think, found currency in the 1990s. Schools began to introduce it into the curricula. And I think that, among other things, is one of the great changes in our knowledge. Yes. And then the ability to disseminate information about architecture instantaneously, such that it is less a curated experience than it is a sort of ubiquity. It is something that is around us in our ether, and we are constantly looking for the shiny new thing. Meanwhile, the world has changed in dramatic and demanding ways, and it has put a greater stringency on us as a people to consider what is really of value to ourselves and to the future of humanity. And I think our own value systems have shifted as a result. So much has evolved and changed over the course of millennia, but in my lifetime and yours.
Yes, it's a fantastic response. Thank you for that. We have entered, over the last few decades, we have entered an era of expediency, to the point where everything is about expediency and not about legacy. Yeah. And so we're just about trying to get the next thing done all the time, right? And I believe it is truly numbing ourselves from a sensitivity that perhaps we as humans used to operate within. Our chief strategy officer here at DesignIntelligence, Hale Kobayashi, was talking this week to us, and he said, we have moved past the age of the what, and we are entering the age of how. Yes. We have so much knowledge, but we don't know what to do with it. So we're entering the how. How are we going to employ this knowledge in a way that really makes a difference? And we're struggling through that as humans, and we certainly are in the world of architecture and design. We have to move beyond computer-aided design or BIM into really a return to what does all this data mean? Our digital data future is not so future. It is now upon us. And the tsunami that is moved across the world, across many industries in this digital data future has yet to really hit the shoreline of architecture and design. It is coming. There's no question. And it's very soon. You can see it. You can see the wave out in front of us coming that way. My fear about that is that it will, as you were saying earlier, is that it may lead us to even responding to it with further specialization, and even further fragmentation of knowledge to try to encompass what it promises. I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of that. my sense is that we need somehow to remove ourselves from this fragmentation of knowledge back to a place of becoming the general architect, perhaps, that knows not only the what, but also the how in many cases, and is not only a master of a thing, but is the jack of all trades and the master of several, as the old saying goes, as opposed to the master of only one. Some responses to some of what I'm saying?
Well, gee, I want to lie down and take an aspirin at this point. Thinking about that. But I think actually the computer really has cracked the egg in so many ways. And I think about pedagogy and how it has affected our own, our own vision of what is available and what we might do. Part of this has to do with, I think, I'm thinking here with you and speculating, the image. There's a difference between theory, image, and reality. And in many cases, the three are dissimilar. We might have lofty goals, but then how to realize that? And then what are our goals as a people or a culture or a civilization for the things that we make? It is too easy to become enamored of image, and we are inundated with images. In fact, if you look at any specific architectural site on the internet today, daily we are served up with images, and part of their goals as they appear online or in our devices is to attract our attention. That has not always been architecture's primary goal.
No.
It is not necessarily the first impression, the two-dimensional impression, if you will, at this point, that is the ultimate goal of architecture. It is to enhance human experience, perhaps, or to enrich human life, or to advance civilization, or to prepare for change. I mean, there's so many goals that architecture has had historically and might still have. At the same time that we're being inundated with, I would say, a proclivity toward image making. And what can those images do? If you look worldwide at architecture, it varies obviously by country, by culture. But there is overall, I think, if you online, a tendency toward the dramatic or flair in image making that leads to a type of architecture that one might hope could be artful, but where is the understanding of the making of that object or that place or that culture or that civilization? What does it add up to? And what are its underlying values? And I think those conversations are really, I think they are taking place, but sporadically, and there is not general agreement about what those aims should be, except in a couple of instances. If you can cling to what matters, and that's going to vary by culture and people and moment. For instance, I think virtually every architect that I am familiar with would say that our relationship to our world and climate and the future that we can make as a people by making projects is one of the two paramount areas of our concern. Yeah. The second is social. And we're in evolving cultures and civilizations and, in fact, value systems that are in conflict with each other at the moment. So on the one hand, we have a clear goal, a North Star, if you will, because architecture can make such a difference to the future of the planet, which is a finite place of fixed resources, and we have a strong role to play in enhancing our place there. Second is social. It's messier, it's demanding, and it involves conflict and conversation. that we have to have as people to arrive at those two goals in this place where I'm sitting and where you're sitting, with the conversations and the direction that we need, that begins to help underpin an understanding of what those images should be, of what this architecture, this proliferation around us in the built environment should add up to. What kind of cities should we make? What sort of people then do we wish to be? And for instance, I think such a conversation could be held about the Saudi Arabian goal of this linear city. What does that mean? And obviously in that demanding climate, it means certain things. And I'm not commenting on good or bad here at all. I'm just saying that is a group of people who have made a decision. Boom.
Right.
It's a line. They've put a line in the sand, literally. So I think we have these underlying values that have to be addressed, understood, and have had the difficult conversations that need to take place to arrive at what our new solutions are going to be. And then we will have new built environments and new cities that reflect who we are and what we want to be. I think at present, we're lost in a sort of tumblation of, the latest boom or shift. Should a building arch? Should it bump? Should it be made of glazing? Should it be made of stone? There's no underlying causality. There's no underlying rationale often. There's a desire for uniqueness and display and imagery. And I think that's part of where we are right now, but it's also a very exciting time because we can make those changes that will lead us to those places where we ultimately will want to reside.
It is a fantastic response to that theme. My mind has so many other directions we could go. I just love this conversation. A few years ago, I was in New York and I was asked to come in and meet with an owner investor, one of the larger ones in the US, and they were making an investment, a co-investment with some universities around some buildings on a particular campus. Yeah. And we would just happen to be meeting in New York where these folks were with their investors. And they had 3 different architects that they had been looking at their designs. And they asked me, I'd like your opinion on these things. And I said, well, everybody's got an opinion, right? At the end of the day, they said, no, we really want to know. And I said, I said, well, I'm curious about what your opinion is. And they had these boards up on the wall that had architect number 1, number 2, and number 3. And they had different images of different projects those architectural firms had done. And we talked about number 1, and it was, as you were describing, the exterior was just, it was a celebration of curvature. That's the best way of putting it. Okay. And it was wow. And the other one was a really celebration of what I would call of the envelope, is what it was. And the other buildings of number 3 were less appealing to the eye, only because they were more simplistic in the sense of what they looked like. And they asked me what I thought. And I said, well, I'm not going to get into a style thing with you, but as my mom used to say to me as a kid, it's what's on the inside that matters.
Yes.
Right. And the question is I know that architect number 3, which you're saying is more kind of simple and not as appealing, architect number 3 is known for high performing buildings. The buildings that they have a sensitivity to the human experience, not only walking up to the building, but walking and living in the building. And they are wickedly focused on energy consumption and human comfort and how do you deal with the waste that comes out of the building, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, you have to kind of ask yourself, what do I want? Do I, as a portfolio owner, am I looking for a performance building or am I looking for a high occupancy building? At the end of the day, this isn't a hotel. You're talking about a university, so they're going to be occupying either way, right? At the end of the day, it was an interesting conversation because even the investor owners were more focused on the exterior appeal of the building, and I found it to be confirming of what you're saying right now. By the way, they ended up choosing architect number 3 because when they looked at, did their due diligence over the next 6 months, they realized that the buildings that number 3 had done were outperforming the other 2 architectural portfolio buildings by a significant margin. And of course, that was going to be better from a profit and loss standpoint and the operational cost of the building. Yeah, right? At the end of the day.
Well, I think, Dave, I don't want to, let's see. I was complicit, if you will, as editor of Architectural Record for almost 15 years in helping to promote the excitement that came with the advancement of computer-aided design.
Right.
And it was a bold and thrilling moment to be able to construct anything that the human mind and technology could provoke. That in a way, it was the appropriate full expression of this amazing advancement. And if we dreamed a building should reflect something non-linear but corpuscular, we could make it. Yeah. My gosh, how exciting, how thrilling that was. And so we chronicled that work. But once you've gotten to a certain point in development and knowledge, and you say, well, yes, I can do that, but should I? Or for what purpose? Or when? Or where? And among the questions that are being asked now is for whom and where? And by whom? So if you ask this question in any given community and you dig and you really try to understand as an architect, a planner, a community member, there's more and more participatory design that should be taking place, and that is in fact taking place. Studios are different, or should be in many ways, as society and culture are shifting. So there's a new baseline of understanding about where individual projects, including these, let's say, hyperbolic inventions, should reside, and how they then fit or don't fit within a given context, a place, a community, a campus. I mean, gosh, we all know university campuses that are just a fruit basket turnover of various styles and types. And yet the ones we return to, I think, with some fondness and sense of longing are places that have some sort of unity, that have some sense of the whole as a campus, with the occasional, perhaps, erratic cousin or odd relative to spice things up. But I think the point there is that there's a discussion about what should these things become, add up to. And that gets to the notion of the city, to the notion of the town, to the notion of the campus, to the notion of the whole. And then of that's relation to the larger place where it resides. For whom? Who's on the campus? Who wants what? Do we want a vision of 19th century vision of 17th century England? Do we want a place that reflects our contemporary values? And what are they? Do we want buildings that talk about energy production and tell us what they're doing? And we can do that. But these are, I think part of what is exciting right now is that we can do all of those things. We can make the hyperbolic building, and it can be extreme, and it can be exciting. And in some cases, in a great practitioner's hand, in an atelier, in an office that has great talent, it can be inspiring and change our perspective completely. We can make a project that fits beautifully into a campus setting and yet operates differently. We do all those things.
It's an extraordinary time with the capabilities we have. It is truly extraordinary because, quoting back to what I was saying earlier from one of our colleagues here, the age of what has peaked. We're just really, we've got all the what we need, right? And now it's not just how, but can we find a unity in our how? And here we go over to the practice and the profession of architecture. As a non-architect and as a lover of architecture myself, I look into this industry and I see more individualism than I see interdependence. And there's a difference. I talk about often independence and interdependence and individualism. And I see that we as an industry operate so often not even independently but individualistically. And that resident in that term is certainly a sense of self and a sense of self-awareness and knowledge and capabilities and all the positive sides. But awareness in that also is, I am alone. I do my own thing. I am a celebration of me, kind of thing. And I'm wondering, Bob, what are the forces? What does history tell us about this? And how can we get back to a unity of how? In this new age of the how? How do we get to how in a unified way? Yeah.
Well, again, 2 aspirin and a 2-hour nap and all will be well. But no, part of this goes back to the history of how things have been made and how we've been taught, and part of this goes back to the École des Beaux-Arts, which really focused on an individual's ability to analyze and to draw and to come to some conclusion about a complex project. And it was a competitive system with masters and students, and we're still working our way out of the fog of what that really proposed to us. Our schools are still in many ways ordered on that system, although they are changing. But it put focus on an individual being able to win ultimately a prize, the Prix de Rome, and the fortunate individual would be chosen after a grueling contest, essentially, that had multiple parts. And that person, having gone through all of that pain and that analysis and meticulous work, emerged as the victor who went to Rome. Now, please tell me, in a narrative sense, what does that say about the culture? It says you've built a narrative that says the winner is one person who will then achieve the golden crown.
And yet we know that it doesn't happen because of one person, right? It's a cast of thousands.
That's our narrative underpinning that we're working our way through now. And in the schools and in the academies, we're having conversations and discussing different ways of making. Now that's how, but it isn't what, but it's how. And I think part of this also goes back to the emergent philosophy in the 18th century, and then strongly in the 19th century, and in this country with people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, about the individual. This has to do with self-reliance, if you will, and it sounds quaint to hark back to that 19th century ideal, but honestly, it has to do with the human sense of genius that emerged in the 17th century and really found real cogency and strength in the 19th century, and found its flourishing in individuals like Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, what better example is there of the architect as genius and as master and as provocateur and as in charge of an environment and a people and a way of learning and ultimately of the prize of making buildings that no one else could do. In our own time, Frank Gehry, I think, embodies that as well as anyone else. There is no other Frank Gehry.
No.
Frank Gehry emerged from a certain milieu and has mastered in an artful way projects that I don't know any other architect that could ascribe to compare to in his own realm. But that all goes back hundreds of years, if you will. That's what we're sort of working our way out of the fog of. And yet Frank Gehry works in an office, or has worked, I don't know the current size of the office, in a large office with many people who help him achieve many things. And most of us work in offices with many people. Individuals get the credit, but the offices actually, in many cases, do even a bulk of the design work. We are, in a way, I think, at a transition point between this notion of the individual and the collective, and this is where part of your concern or question really lies. We haven't abandoned this goal yet, and yet there's one Frank Gehry, one Frank Lloyd Wright that comes along a century, and so what about the other 110,000 individuals who, in the license sense, are practicing architecture? No, we're doing something differently. And many of us are working toward new ways of valuing what we do. And I think more importantly, setting new visions and new guidelines for what this ultimate production, this ultimate work, this ultimate art really should do.
You know, a few years ago, and of course, I know you know him, Moshe Safdie.
Yeah.
A few years ago, we were honoring Moshe at a Design Futures Council event, and we were at the Harvard Club in New York City. He's a lovely man, and his wife, and he came to our audience. There were about 100, 120 executives in the audience, and we honored him with an award, and then he wanted to present and talk about his life work all the way back to the element, all the way into the future. And it had not been right before that they had commissioned his Singaporean airport that is just mind-blowing, extraordinary.
Yes.
And he did something that I have yet to really see others do, certainly someone of his consequence. He looked in the audience and he saw one of the managing partners of Burrow Happold sitting there. And he got up to make his slide. It shows the waterfall coming into the airport, that beautiful thing. And he talks about the design and he talks about the intricacy, and we'd never done this before, et cetera, et cetera. And then he turned to the audience and said, none of this would have been possible without our friends at Burrow Happold.
Yeah, sure.
And I would like so-and-so to stand up, if you would please, just to recognize that my designs are only as good as your engineering.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have almost our architects and audience, and they were like, did he actually
Yes.
give credit to
Yes.
others for this design? And he did. And there was a moment at that place that said, we have moved from individualism to an interdependence for that moment. And it was so exciting and celebratory. Bob, why can't we get to that maturity, that emotional maturity, that it's okay to share credit and love and glory with others?
Yes. Number one, what you described should have happened. I mean, that's certainly baseline. We make virtually every project that we make couldn't occur without bright engineers and collaborating landscape architects and wayfinders and on and on and on. And our list of collaborators has grown so extensively that this work is a work of collaboration today. It absolutely is. That is not lip service, it's a fact. And the architect, obviously, for the last decades has really been sort of searching for his or her defining role in that process, because it's possible to turn over the project to some other person and or some other group who has extreme knowledge. They're engineers who are extremely versed in the making of places. But architects have had this unique understanding that their training and their calling, if you will, because architecture still has this element of a vocation where you're really called to do this thing, perhaps to our own detriment, because we're called to do it despite tremendous difficulties that lie in our path to achieve. Our calling has really said, well, yes, but we have the ability and the desire to engage philosophy, to engage sociology, to engage community organizing, to engage the fine arts, to engage science, all of these disciplines. And so there's so much that is called for within this finite human capacity that architects have embraced. And as culture and civilization have become more complex, the demands on us are extreme, and we can't hold all those things in our heads individually. Just a few short decades ago, many architects across the country, and particularly for smaller projects, did their own structural engineering. They had slide rules, and they'd sit and literally figure out, well, a beam only needs to be X. The air conditioning system, many architects knew how to do heating and air conditioning calculations, and literally sat and did them within their own offices. And that waned in the 1970s or so. As projects became more complex. It is rare today to see an architect who will do her own structural calculations, although we should be able to do them up to a point.
Yeah. What an extraordinary, conversation. You're going to run out of your bottle of aspirin if I keep asking these crazy questions. Yeah. But this has been a wonderful exchange with you, talking about this grand theme of relevance. And I was asked just this week by, again, an investment group that was looking to, a private equity group that was looking at a few architectural firms to invest in. And one of the managing partners of the group said to me, "What do you believe to be the biggest risk to architecture?" Wow, there's a boil the ocean question, right? That's a big one.
Right.
And I thought for a moment and I said, relevance.
Uh-huh.
It really is today. The question in the front of mind, whether it's about the advancement of AI or the race to the bottom on design fees or other disruptors coming into this world, there is a constant question on the front of the mind of the profession: are we relevant to where the world is going? Right. Mm-hmm. And I find it to be a funny question because I think that you cannot have a world where humans live without architecture.
Yeah, yes. And as I'm sitting there responding to that, Dave, I would also add, I think the greatest risk is hubris. I think that that our insularity, if you will, as an architectural culture, we've made this place that, we only wear black shirts and have round glasses. And no, what this has produced in many ways is good, but in many ways it's hermetic. We're sealed off in a bubble, and nobody talks like us, knows like us. We seek our own for social events. No, and we're seeing that change now. where we need to be able to be empathetic. We need to be able to listen. And we're not taught to listen. We're taught to do. We're taught to be. We're taught to make, perhaps imperfectly, but we're taught to be the source, not the voice. We need to be able to hear more clearly what the audiences, what the communities, what the collaborators, what the city is saying to us. And this, I think, I think that actually is perhaps our largest risk. And I would classify that as hubris. I would say we have to build up a shell to be able to stand in front of a group and defend something that really doesn't have parameters. The value of this project is what it is. It should be self-evident. That's often our position, don't you see? Instead, the person talking to us who's asked for something is asking for something different. Mm-hmm. So I think our ability to be able to listen, honestly, I think that's the key to our future.
Wow. And that is a response to end this time with us, because honestly, it is so profound in its directness and simplicity. It really is. There's an old James Taylor, that at least the James Taylor that maybe you and I grew up with, Fire and Rain and all of that. Sure. And he has this song where in some of the lyrics he says, if I had stopped to listen once or twice, if I had closed my mouth and opened my eyes, if I had cooled my head and warmed my heart, I'd not be on this road tonight.
Very good.
Which meant he was in this lost place because of all of that. And you summarize that through that very direct point of hubris that can be turned by listening. Bob Ivy, thanks for joining us in this time together.
Great, Dave. Enjoyed it so much. Real pleasure to me. Thank you.